Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 16th, 2024. Well, as most of you probably already know, the U.S. presidential election for 2024 kicked off yesterday with the so-called Iowa caucuses. And the result of those caucuses was a resounding victory for former President Donald Trump, who received more than 50% of the vote. The race for second place, you have DeSantis and Haley pretty much within a few votes of each other at around 20%. But I would say this was a predetermined outcome. Let me tell you why. All you need to know about this campaign was covered in Politico in a report on how the money is being distributed by the political action committees of the banks, the hedge funds, the military financial complex. According to the report, there was $136 million poured into the Iowa Republican caucuses. The money spent on television from this, DeSantis had $30 million, Haley $28.7 million, Trump only $10.8 million, but he gets a lot of free coverage. But what that means is $136 million to brainwash the population to thinking that they're engaging in a democratic selection process. It looks like about 120,000 participants. So you do the math, $136 million for 100,000, 120,000 participants. Now, this is designed to carry out an ongoing brainwashing of the population. Did people know what they were voting for? I mean, we're in a situation of wars, more wars every day, permanent wars. Ukraine, the Gaza situation. Now we see the Red Sea and Yemen, the targeting of Iran, war plans already drafted for going to war with China over Taiwan. The British Defense Minister Shapps yesterday announced proudly that Britain will be sending 20,000 troops into the NATO Steadfast Defender 24 maneuvers in the spring. So we're seeing an escalation. There are German troops now in Lithuania. There are American troops all over Europe, as well as all over the world. Now, given that these war plans are already drafted, how close are we to having new wars, a false flag operation, or a provocation that's responded to by one of the targets? And next thing you know, we're on the edge of a global war, possibly a nuclear war. Now, also, we're seeing the weaponization of the dollar. The policies, sometimes called the Great Reset, and the World Economic Forum is meeting now in Davos. Who knows what they're going to come up with, since their plans have not exactly worked out. But the attempt to establish a top-down central banker dictatorship over the world economy to impose a transition to an anti-growth green policy, which means depopulation. And that's been the intent of the so-called environmental movement since it was launched by the European oligarchs with the Club of Rome in the 1960s. Now, while this is going on, there's a tremendous uprising against it. We have in Ukraine, we have Russia basically fighting all of NATO and winning. The attempt to undermine national sovereignty, which is part of the World Economic Forum policy, part of the Western policy, is being rejected as we see sovereign nations banding together in the BRICS, which went from the 5 members to now the BRICS 10. We see economic development plans with moves to go outside the dollar, the so-called de-dollarization. That's being pushed by these war policies. The nations that are being subjected to sanctions, that are watching the energy prices go up and down depending on what the market's trying to do. There's an effort to protect nations, and they're banding together, and not just for defensive protection, but for economic development, cooperation, a revival of what existed in the 50s with the non-aligned movement, the idea that nations do not want to be herded into having to choose blocks. Now, Is any of this appearing in the presidential race? Well, you would think if you listen to it that the most serious threat facing the nation is a handful of men transitioning to women to compete in NCAA swimming meets against women. You know, the woke agenda is the target. Well, the woke agenda is part of the degeneration of culture. But it's that degeneration of culture which is blinding you to the fact that you're being herded into wars and depression by a global oligarchy, which has as its intention the reduction of population, the reduction of living standards, not for them, of course, and an attempt to destroy any alternative to the unipolar order. So we have, in a sense, a selection process, not an election. And what we're seeing with the use of identity politics in shaping the American election is a local form of geopolitics, what we're seeing internationally. The turning of people against each other based on race, religion, sexual orientation, the divide and conquer strategy. And so you're cheering for candidates who mostly put out endless babble, especially if you're listening to the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. But what's the policy? Who's shaping the policy? Not the American people. The American people don't like these policies. But what they're being told is the choice is between bad choice A or bad choice B. Now, I will say that at least in the case of Donald Trump, on Sunday, he raised the issue of the danger of nuclear war. But what was his solution? His solution was, elect me and I'll fix it. That's not a solution. The solution is a rallying of the American people, not around slogans such as America First, but around economic development perspective based on the idea of physical economy. Now, it's clear there's a fear of Trump, and the fact that he trounced Haley and DeSantis in Iowa is no doubt causing much more panic in the establishment than existed before the votes yesterday. But what do they have as their plan? One, lawfare. Try to use the cases against him, the 4 cases of 91 counts, to try and keep him out of the White House. It may not work. In fact, it makes him more of a folk hero because it's an example of the establishment trying to take away your right to actually choose. But the other option, and they're working on this nonstop, is how to control a potential Trump presidency. You don't think it's possible? Well, think about what happened in the first term. Think about the names McMaster, Kelly, Gary Cohn, Mnuchin, Bolton, Pompeo. While Trump was speaking about working with Russia and China, his advisors were sabotaging that. When Trump was talking about ending the dangers of war, his advisors were carrying out the same policies, working with the British and NATO, that went against what people thought they were voting for when they voted for Trump. So this is why it's not enough to pick a candidate like you're choosing a team to root for in the Super Bowl. It's necessary that the American people be engaged intellectually, emotionally, morally, understanding the issues from the standpoint of history, from the standpoint of physical economy, from the standpoint of science. Who's doing that as a candidate? Well, there's one candidate who is doing that, Diane Sare, who's running as an independent for the U.S. Senate in New York State. And Diane is building a national campaign team in all states to present an alternative to what's otherwise vacuous sloganeering and propitiation, which is funded massively by the same cartels that are trying to convince you that the economy's good and these wars are a good protection of American security. So don't be played. Don't be a sucker. I would urge you to check out the website of Diane Sare, and I'll link it in the description section, to give you a sense that there is a chance for an independent candidate to make a difference. And we need more of that. We need the actual discussion of what it takes to rebuild a nation. Again, not slogans like MAGA, but how we rebuild infrastructure. Who has a plan for it? How we can work with the global South to overcome the problems with the collapse of the global physical economy, the shutdown of trade, the deindustrialization that's underway. We've been working on this for 50 years, and I'd urge you to join with us to make sure that this election is not a soap opera, but that there's actually a direction which the American people can participate in to really save the nation and to save humanity. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.